Welcome, Edoardo.
Thank you.
Welcome to this edition of Volcast. This is a new angle that we are doing in the Voices of Experience series. And what we aim to do is to exchange about career aspirations, which are then seen and transmitted. We're now about 2 years out of COVID. I think we all saw a big change in the business cycles there. In your experience, pre and post-COVID, when you're meeting people, you're hiring people, you're assessing people, or you're leading people, what changes in your mind do you need to make to move things forward effectively in the future?
First of all, Robert, thanks for inviting me. I think it's a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Before jumping into the discussion of the trends, so back to your question, I just would like to make a little bit of a sort of introduction of what I see actually the overall Asian market. I've been here for more than 20 years. I've been working for different companies and so on, and I think, of course, we are, as you mentioned very well, in a moment of shifting. I think that the COVID was a very important moment in Asia, in China in particular, but there is a shifting industry with some very peculiar trends that we will analyze later in our conversation. I think that's there are a couple of things that I would like to highlight, and I think that's in this 20 years, more than 20 years in Asia, I learned a few things, and I think that's probably the two most important things are two values, and one is flexibility, and the other one is resilience. When you manage a business, especially in luxury retail in Asia, you need to be able to be kind of dual speed. You need to be very fast. So the flexibility is very important. Asia is a very relevant part of our business. It's probably the most vibrant. Lot of brands, a lot of companies, they do a big portion of their business in Asia or with Asians. So it's a very important part. It's very flexible because trends actually are born and die very, very quickly. So you need to be very flexible. But on the other hand, you need to be also able to run a marathon. And the marathon is on how you build your brand. You don't build a brand overnight. So you need to be able to survive in this kind of dual mode in which you are very fast, but also you need to have a long sight view on how to establish those pillars for whatever business that you create. This is very important. The second one is more on the particular, I would say, on the peculiarity of the market in Asia. Trust and consistencies are extremely important on how you build your brand, on how you present yourself, on what you say, what you generate, so the result that you generate. And the markets benchmark you as a person, you as a manager, and you as a brand. So that's very important. So trust and consistency are extremely important factors in the management of a brand, of a luxury brand in Asia. And the last thing, which is very important, it's more on the way in which people are perceived. We live in the world in which the sort of individualism is prevailing, right? Especially in the West. In Asia, it's more personalization than individualism. I think that there is a high perception of community, so people tend to live in a community to see the result of the community, but doesn't mean that you don't want to be different than others. So you want to be unique, and this is very important because when you cater actually activities, actions, products, and so on, you need to make sure that you let your customer feel unique. So it's a personalization rather than being an individual. So these are the three major, I would say, setup that I would like to share with you. But back to your question, okay, what are the trends? I think that there are some some clear trends that we are witnessing in the last I would say a few years, and probably the COVID was, as you said, it was a pivotal moment on this. So the first one, which is extremely clear, and it's starting to be probably one of the bases of the business in Asia, is the fact that customer, they like to shop in multi-dimensional. So they want to shop online, offline, in the store, from home, using the mobile, using the computer, whatever. So a multi-platform, what is called the Omni-Channel, a few years ago was a plus, now is a must. You need to make sure that you serve your customer at 360 degrees, and when they visit your store, your physical store, they can decide to buy there, to buy from home, to visit the product. I mean, a few years ago, around 50% of your customer that visit your store had already visited, your website and got a little bit of knowledge of the products. Nowadays, I would say, is the majority. Everyone knows.
I have a question there, though. Many of the most successful brands have a very long heritage, and they come from Western Europe, from Italy, from France. How do you balance living here in Hong Kong and in Asia between the great traditions of the design studio and of the management with what you just said, omni-channel, high-tech, digital, and all this has happened in the last 10 to 15 years and at a very rapid pace? How do you, as a senior executive and with your teams, convince the people over in Europe, if you have to, but I assume that there is a certain amount of differing opinions between the traditions of the home base versus the front line, which has now become perhaps the most successful market area of the world.
This is probably one of the difficulties that we are all facing here. Speed versus slow pace. Yes, I think that the heritage, it's very important. But what's the consumer, the customer in Asia, they see as a very important, as a very relevant, is actually the relevance of the brands, the meaning of the brands, the connection that the brands has with certain values. Okay, we see that there are brands that are very consistent with their message. Some brands they have a very clear, I would say, value that are related to trips, voyage, transportations, and these brands, or there are brands that are very much linked to craftsmanship, to details, to let's say, to the way in which you manufacture your product, so the intrinsic value of the product itself. So these two values, they can actually live together. So you can actually use this as a base of your basket. Of the value, but they are not necessarily a marketing tools. I don't believe, and this is my personal opinion, I don't believe that actually customer in Asia, they buy a brand because they know that it's 100 years or plus years old. They buy because they feel that there is a consistency, and it's back a little bit back of the discussion that we had before. There is a consistency on what are you offering, where are you offering, which kind of product, which kind of service, and is it all connected? And when they buy a product, it's not only buying some physical things, it's actually an experience. So you need to make sure that around that product, you create that kind of experience, of engagement that let your customer feel unique, that let your customer resonate with what you are saying, with what you are providing. And also you can say, and by the way, my brand has got an heritage as such.
So far, we've talked about your experience and the experience of the origins of any particular brand, and we've talked about the consumer. What about the staff and the management? On today's scale, 95%, if not 99% of the local company's staff now are from particular markets, and they're not from Milan, for example. So how do you get across this? What do I need as a potential candidate to bring to the table, if you like? And then what will I get, if I get the job, what will I get inside the company? In your experience, do companies adapt their training that what they might say to an Asian employee, they might not need to say to somebody who's joining the brand in Italy or France?
Robert, you opened the door to a very, very complex theory with a complex issue. I think there are two, if I have to analyze this question, I think that there are two aspects of this question. The first one is how you as a professional in this industry, how you measure, how you evaluate, people that want to work for you, for example. So, in the interview setup, what are the values, what are the characteristics that you are, that you are searching, that you are looking for in a person. And the second one is that how an organization, which is not necessarily based, as you said, in Asia, it's able to find the right training, the right setup of attract, develop, and retain talent.
Absolutely.
So these are two very different things. Back to the first question, and this is again is my personal opinion. When I have interviewed so many people in the last few years, and I always look to one thing. So of course, beside the skill matching, that goes without saying, but there is one characteristic that makes a person very different from others, and this is the motivation. So the real motivation for the change, or the real motivation for joining you in that particular setup. The motivation is long-lasting, is not necessarily linked to to your salary, to your package and so on. But the motivation is very personal and is related to your success. To what you can really contribute to a certain organization. And in my experience, in the last years, I saw people that on paper they were coming from maybe different position, maybe lower, maybe a different segment, a different, probably a little bit different part of the industry, but with a very strong motivation. And I say that most of them, they've been really successful. So this is what I think makes a very big difference in the, let's say, in the success trajectory of a person. Back to the second question, how a company which is not necessarily based in Asia, so is not based with the Asian values, the one that we discussed before, is able to attract, let's say, develop and maintain talents. That's very difficult. That's one of the major challenge that everyone has got in this industry. I think the successful company are those that create a system in which you have not only a top-down, but a bottom-up approach. So listen. You need to listen a lot what the organization needs, what the organization actually need in order to keep, to attract people, to keep them, and to develop. Right? So that's very important. And this is applicable, if I may, Robert, not only to the organization, but also to products. To the way in which you activate your engagements program with customers and so on. So you need to make sure that everything you do is consistent with the famous basket of values that are in your brand,
yes.
But also that is consistent with the values in Asia. And those successful companies, brands, are those that are able to create this kind of bridge, this kind of connection.
As organizations have got bigger and more successful in Asia, and in particular I think going back a few years, the first market was Japan, and then there was a little bit of a pause, and then mainland China, supported very much by Singapore, Seoul, Hong Kong, Macau, have really developed. What we've seen with the digital revolution of the last 15 years is a much bigger corporate group. They're not engaged with customers. They're not engaged with the brand in the same way that sales, marketing, and merchandisers are. How do you get across to lawyers, IT people, these O2O, online to off people, or online to offline people, to buy into these brand values and help build this brand equity? It must be a big challenge, because you're not touching the product or engaging with the customers on an everyday basis. But without you, as many high street brands can identify today, one particular big chain in the UK recently went offline and then sort of lost all its profit for the year. So how do you deal with them?
This is a difficult question, and I don't think that I have an answer to this. I can provide my opinion, and my opinion is that yes, digital is taking the scene already. I mean, a few years, but I still believe that the retail industry is a person industry, is a human industry, is an industry in which the human contact is unavoidable. And which means that, I mean, you can get a lot of service, products, engagement digitally, and this is again is becoming a very big part. But you still need to have, I mean, to experience the products, the store in which you have someone that is introducing to you a certain product with a history, with the narrative of that particular products. This component here, let's say the tactile component, the human component, I don't think that is going to vanish. I think they will be still very relevant, but of course, I mean, you made a big mistake if you think that there is no relevance on the digital. Again, the success probably is if you make the two environments absolutely seamless. So in which you don't understand anymore where is the boundaries, and that's probably is the answer to your question.
If I am young and ambitious and coming into this business, perhaps one of the good factors against the march of artificial intelligence is the fact this is a human contact business. So you foresee that certainly at the front line and within the shop environment, that the person-to-person contact and the relationship building is not going to get taken over anytime soon by artificial intelligence.
I think the artificial intelligence will make a big change in this industry, as is doing in most of the industry. The artificial intelligence, it's already present in our industry. You don't see it because at this stage, as most of the time, on the back end of the industry. So I mean, we are using actually a lot of AI in analysis, for example, especially product analysis. When you have market, and again, it's something that we discussed before, markets that are so diversified in Asia, because we are talking about China versus Australia. There are two worlds in two different seasons at the same time. You need to be very, very focused on which product you want to put in your store, right? And of course, you rely on your experience, but you need to rely also on data. On data. Mm-hmm. AI is a big help. It's doing, is a revolution. So this is something that is already here. I think that AI will be even more involved in this industry, and it will move actually the value chain more and more at the front end. So it's the customer relationship. But I still believe that the human interaction will not disappear in this industry.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely vital in this relatively low-tech business at the front end. We can't work 7 days a week, but out here it always strikes me, depending on whether you're working with Americans or with Europe, that we're in the halfway between two time zones. So it's very easy to become 6 and 7 days a week. So what do you do to relax when you get some time off? And then how do you apply your fun time to, if you like, applying some of those experiences to leadership? So I hear you had a recent interesting experience on the sea.
So look, Robert, again, this is a difficult question because it's very personal, and I think that yes, I am a strong believer that a person is a person in the holistic standpoint. I mean, I don't believe those people that say I am this person at work and this person in my personal life. You are one. And you need to be very balanced. So, and when you say balance, is that there is no a formula. A balance for you is very different, I mean, from mine and vice versa. You will find your balance when you are happy on what you do. No matter if you work a day a week or 7 days a week, and no matter if you work 8 hours a day or 3 hours a day. So it's important that you are balanced. It's important that you manage a good, let's say, level of energy that is transferable between what you do at work and what you do in your personal life. Yes, I'm a sailor. I did a lot of offshore sails. I mean, 2 years ago I crossed the ocean, and I'm doing a lot of sails here. I mean, a lot of race here. I mean, here in Hong Kong, and I found that yes, it's a hobby. But it's a hobby that is becoming more and more a part of my life, because of course I also I'm a certified instructor, so I also do this one as a passion. My passion is to develop people, to see people that in my organization and at other level, they develop themselves. They become better people than before. Sailing is a sport that is a team sport. First of all, is a sport in which, I mean, you need to make sure that the result is not your result; it's a team result. So that's very important. You're not necessarily leading the team at that moment, because there might be a skipper or a captain. So you need to make sure that you are following, and at the same time you are leading on what you are doing. So you have a specific task and that moment. And it's a sport in which you have a lot of course, you have it's very physical, but at the same time it's also mental. You need to make sure that you balance yourself, that you don't do too much and you don't do over your limits. There is a lot of logic on what you do. There is a lot of strategy. There is a lot of variable that you need to put together in order to achieve good results.
Would it be fair to say, though, also the contrast is that you go offline to a much greater degree in this kind of sport and leisure than you do in the work environment, Monday to Friday, where you have to be connected and multi-market and intercontinental at the same time? Does that help relax you?
Absolutely, yes. And I mean, for example, when I crossed the ocean 2.5 years ago, I mean, I was off for 6 weeks, and I was not reachable for 6 weeks.
So this was a COVID opportunity, was it?
It was a little bit after COVID, but it was planned during COVID, you're right. And it was an incredible experience. So you need to do a lot of planning before in order not to disrupt, of course, your...
You haven't said which ocean?
The Atlantic.
Atlantic, wow. That's very
yeah,
impressive. From one side to the other?
From Portsmouth in the UK to Punta del Este in Uruguay. So it was 6 weeks.
So also from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere as well. That's amazing. Do you have to choose the season very carefully to avoid the storms as much as possible?
Yes. There is not only the season that you need to choose. You need to choose also the path, because you know there are the trade winds. winds that actually are that actually push you. So let's say the race was most of the time with downwind. So I mean, you have winds that push you. So that's an advantage. You have, of course, in the middle of the ocean, very close to the equator. I mean, you have an area called the doldrums, where you have no winds. You know, and again, I mean, making a comparison to the professional world, I think there are moments in which markets are stagnating. So you need to find a way in order to let's say to face that, to tackle that one. It's a long journey. It's a 6 weeks, as I said, and I mean, once you leave the shore in the UK, I mean, you don't see anything but sunset and sunrise, and probably a couple of boats in 6 weeks, and that's it. And then, I mean, when you see the land, you really realize how important it was in the old days when they, when the sailor travel and and they see the land. It's an achievement. It's an achievement.
Fascinating, because the two halves of the old world, the Asia world and the European world, mostly from the European end, the connectivity with Asia came from sailors and ship, whereas from the Asian continent to the edges of Europe came over land. So it's as Europeans, I think it's fascinating, and you can see how the marks which these ships left over time was slowly how, in our industry, in the luxury goods industry, how we became connected slowly but surely over time. And then we've seen the adaptivity, to use an invented word, over the last decades towards modernity. And for example, as intercontinental flights came, so more tourism started, markets started to open up. Quite contrary perhaps to today's environment, where tariffs are rising in certain parts of the world, tariffs were falling. So we've seen trade develop, and it's built, I think, very good career opportunities over the last few decades for particularly people in Asia. There were no opportunities 20, 30, 40 years ago in this business. So I think there's been a lot of good done, but to make it sustainable over a period of time, adaptation is required, I think, to keep it moving.
Correct.
There was probably a period, perhaps after the great financial crisis in the GFA in 2008, which didn't really affect this part of the world to the same degree that it did in other parts of the world. Like there was growth like there was no tomorrow from around the time perhaps of the Beijing Olympic Games, when we saw more tourism starting and more people outbound tourism from mainland China in particular, right through to 2020 when the COVID period came. We saw growth. So everybody started to think they were super geniuses at stacking this growth. Go back and look at numbers in 2014, 2015, and compare them perhaps with today, and the business has doubled. But now it's getting more challenging, and many of our businesses are stock market-led organizations as well. So there must be challenges for those that work in publicly listed companies now to balance brand equity with sales. I mean, is that something that preys on your mind every day, that there are ways of perhaps building the business and building, at the end of the day, profitability for shareholders without necessarily growing the top line of sales?
Yes, I think that nowadays, I mean, we live in an environment in a world in which everything is fast. The information are really quick. I mean, you do something in Beijing, and I mean, here in Hong Kong in a matter of a split second. And probably companies, they are also using this pace, this speed, when they are looking for profits, when they're looking for results. It's everything very, very fast. And again, we as manager, we as a professional, especially in this part of the world, we need to make sure that we balance out short and long-term results.
It always, when people ask me, for example, what made Hong Kong, and I say to them, I'll give you one word, it's slightly flippant, in elevators, and that's what made New York elevators. What made luxury possible in the last few decades has been air freight as well, so speed to market.
Absolutely.
If we still had to put our luxury products on a ship and wait 8 weeks, we would probably be missing the season unless you were in Australia, in which case you might be early. So it's the world has got faster as a result of the speeding up of everything, and then the ability now not just to have phone calls. I mean, I remember having a discussion with some luxury brands people quite a few years ago now in Tokyo, and they were saying that when they first came to Japan, people older than me, they used to book calls to New York and Europe and have that call per month.
It was a collect call.
Yeah, absolutely. And a collect call, absolutely, if you had the budget. So now everything is at high speed all the time. And I think that is one of the big challenge with the managers coming into the business is how they manage these dual speeds. On the one hand, there's the stock market quoted companies versus the private companies. And also then you've got brand equity, which is nurturing like farming, versus the speed of the consumer and the ability to see it online and want it immediately and have it delivered to your home without becoming unnecessarily mass market in such a way that the consumers then don't want the product because it's no longer exclusive.
Yeah.
So I think on a day-to-day basis, you must find a lot of contradictions which you need to get across to your teams. It's no longer just if it ever was, a straight line.
To this topic here, I think there are two very important topics that are connected to this. One is the sustainability, because up to which extent speed it's aligned with sustainability. I don't know, honestly, and it's a big question. I think that, that now a lot of brands, they are contemplating the transportation of goods not necessary with air freight, just to make sure that the CO2 footprints is not, hitting the sky. And the second topic is scarcity versus desirability. Yes, you need to be very quick. You need to do something that's in Paris and the same time, in Hong Kong. But what about scarcity? And that there are still brands in this market that they work very well with scarcity of the products. And again, I don't think that there is a rule on this. There is not a formula, but I think there are, elements that you need to consider in your strategy. Yeah,
not to be necessarily overexposed simply because there is a very nice modern mall in a city with a substantial population. You mentioned logistics, I think, right? I recall that looking at that myself and looking at perhaps which cities in mainland China they could become a potential rail crossroads and redistribute. But with disruption that's come in Europe in the last few years, that has not gone as fast. Out here in Asia, we're not the producers, we're not the creators. They have their own challenges with materials. The other area, I suppose, which sustainability is starting to have an impact on is how we design the stores, how we use energy, etc. Any inputs on that? Practical training to people as simply as turn off the lights?
It's a topic that resonates with one of the first things that we said at the beginning, which is consistency. I think that's and what the consumer actually are searching today, and they're searching for reason, for relevance, for meaningful brands. I think that's there are a lot of companies that use sustainability as a punch bowl, as as a buzzword to create, to markets. And there are others that actually they really believe on this, and they do a lot of actions, which is not only, switching off the lights in your office, which, by the way, it's important, but also the way in which you build your office, the way in which you build your store, the way in which you build your products. So there are a lot of actions that you can do in your value chain, and of course, the more you go up or down, it depends on your point of view, the more difficult it is, because in theory, you need to have visibility of raw material, manufacturer, and so on. So I think that's customer, they are very smart, and they know very well what you are doing. And if you are consistent, if you are using sustainability as a marketing tool, they know very well. If you're using the sustainability as something that you truly believe, and you are trying to do your utmost, create a sustainable business model, I think that this is something that it will really pay off in future. Yeah.
And I think this is important because, for the most part, out here in Asia, brands lease their stores from first-class property developers, whereas perhaps in Europe and United States, brands might buy buildings or parts of buildings and have their own responsibility. What's the kind of is the collaboration important between key property developers and the stores, so that your store A is extremely sustainable and ESG compliant, and then in another store down the road it isn't, because the property developer has a different point of view? But are you finding now that the collaboration between property developers and luxury brands is getting better? Because luxury brands are an extremely important part of their portfolio now and generate huge profits for them.
In luxury business, property developer are probably one of the major stakeholder of your business, and a successful collaboration, it's for sure one of the most important ingredients for the successful recipe, for sure. It's not only on the sustainability, it's on everything, on every aspect of the collaboration. A collaboration goes to how you make sure that you activate your business and you find a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You said right. The major difference between Europe and Asia is that here we are in a market in which we have a very short time commitments. For the real estate, which, by the way, is one of the advantage of Asia, and again, is connected to what we said of the speed of the markets. In a nutshell, you can say, well, we create, so the property developer, they create the traffic, and the brands, they convert traffic into transaction. It's not so sharp, actually. So it's more a cooperation. It's more a way to say, look, we are teaming up together. We develop a property. You develop a certain space within the property, but we are together. So we need to make sure that we both attract the right customer. We both make sure that we engage with them. We create a sort of, a 360 experience, And in this experience, one of the formula is to convert the traffic into transaction in the store, but it's a tiny part.
It gives two meanings to sustainability then. There's sustainability in the ESG sense, in the environmental sense, and there's also the meaning of this business needs to sustain. As you say, leases are relatively short in this part of the world compared with leasing in Europe or the US, which then often makes buying more feasible. So sustainability is things will not necessarily be like they were a few years ago, up. So we need to work together to sustain and to make sure that we can continue to operate with particular developers in particular cities or on particular streets. Do you find, in your experience as well, that the landlords generally are understanding this? Is it clicking with them?
Not across the border. I think there are landlords, there are property developers, they understood very well. And they create an infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, it's not necessarily what they built, but how they built and which kind of organization they create in order to make that kind of development that they understood very well. And when you sit in a meeting with them, you have the feeling that there is a real win-win search of a win-win solution. So that's very clear. There are other examples in which this is not exactly, happening. There are still property developer landlords. They are a little bit attached to a model which, in my opinion, belong a little bit of the past.
Areas that merchants, sales management, marketing management, press and media communications people can relate to. We've talked a little bit about business development now. I think there are two other aspects of sustainability which I find fascinating, is that when we started to grow this part of the world, even including Japan, the customers are relatively young because it was new. The populations in Asia are probably the fastest aging in the world, and many brands have 30, 40 years of longevity here now, so they have customers at both ends of the spectrum. How is the industry going to address this, that they've got to appeal to the 60, 70 somethings and the 20, 30 somethings at the same time, sometimes even mother and daughter in some cases. So this is going to be, I think, a new challenge of having a wide spectrum of consumer expectations based on age.
There are two aspects, actually. Yes, this is absolutely true. But there are two aspects, actually, of this issue. The first one is that there is a sort of rejuvenation of the shopping. I think that's, and this is something that happened in the last probably 10 years. Typically in this industry, categories of product that they were not considered luxury, they now became luxury. Sneakers, hoodies, t-shirts, something that was really, really much related to sports and streetwear. Any shop that you step in Hong Kong, you will find this kind of product.
We have a couple of new phrases coming, athleisure.
Yes, exactly.
Quite luxury.
Exactly. So this is something that's it's helping a little bit this aspect, because a customer that are aging, they probably would like to look a little bit younger, and they find a way of shopping together with their, with their new generation. It's not unusual to see, as you said, mother and daughter, or mother and son, that they actually go in the same shop and they buy probably different things. Mother probably is buying a little bit more, more classic products, and the daughter is buying probably a little bit entry level and more, I would say, less classic products. So this is something that's it's happening. So, and I think with the introduction of this new kind of product category, of course, naturally has enlarged the spectrum of the consumer. And of course, the second one is and it's back to your question: how a brand can cater such a wide range, such a wide spectrum of age. And again, I don't have an answer for this. And I don't think that there is a formula to answer this. But again, I think that's if you manage to be consistent with your values, and you manage to find different way of engaging, because the engagement is not one fits all. It's not one size fits all.
I agree
the engagement is what for a particular set of of customer. And the successful brands in this industry are those that manage very well and very focus the data on their customer, and they create very clear cluster that is based on purchase history, age, and location, and so on, in which when you launch a particular product, you know that particular product goes in that particular cluster. Then, of course, it may goes, much wider, but the way in which you market at the beginning the particular product, it's for that category of customer, and you need to make sure that you create a specific way of engage that particular customer. And you can have at the same time in your store two very different kind of customer, and that they have different age profile and so on. A lot of brands in the last few years, they enter into the market of the fragrance, right? Fragrance is a typical product that goes really, really wide, It can go from, it's actually genderless and ageless, So that is a typical product in which you can cater very different kind of
Although in my experience, I agree with that. The other aspect, though, with fragrances is culture, and in some markets, it's used in different ways. My experience in Japan was it was tended to be used more as to perfume the room rather than to perfume the body. But it is good to see that perfumes finally are finding their way in Asia. It was the first to come into the market, but did not resonate in Asia in the way that it had resonated where it was founded, back, or in Western style back in Europe. Just to give a little bit of publicity to the architecture side and to in-house store designers as well, and linking back to age and aging clientele, mobility and accessibility in stores as well. Is that something that the type of stairways, whether to have an elevator inside the store for the clients rather than to ask them to leave the store, go to the escalator and go upstairs? Are these accessibility features now, if they're not already something which is on the agenda, do you think this is something that's important, in a very subtle, in a non-discriminatory way, going to come onto the agenda in the next few years?
My observation in the markets is relatively slow. It's very slow. I think that on this respect, property developer are much more advanced. Of course, they probably have some kind of sort of compliance that they have to follow. Brands, they are a little bit slower on this. And I think that this is probably one of the topics that is going to be in the agenda of...
it has to be very subtle, though. And there are some markets like Australia where the legislation is much more developed, shall we say. The in-house store designers and the store developers of brands have to move forward more quickly than perhaps in other markets in Asia, where the legislation is less developed so far, perhaps even behind. And then it really depends on the landlord and property developer as well. I'm not really talking about distinctive age discrimination, if you like, but so much more as something built into the architecture that makes the experience for the older clients so much better, particularly as stores get bigger and multi-floored as well, is no longer to leave some of the decisions to the store people. Would you like an elevator in your store? Yeah. No, thank you. We don't
just
need
put
one.
This one as
if anybody wants to go upstairs, we can go out on the escalator. No, I think it starts to be a management requirement, and I think merchants, marketeers, visual display people need to be involved in this process. So again, that I think is something which incoming managers and existing managers need to be aware of. In-house training, I think a few years ago there was the product trainer, Now he or she has to be much more rounded in the kinds of training curricula that they need to deliver. And I think that this is something that when we are now catering towards this sort of 20-something to 60, 70-something clients, that we need to subtly build into the store. And I think it can make the stores so much more interesting. Some perhaps with more of these subtle features and some less, so that you can really almost choose, particularly in the major centers around Asia where the brand has more than one store, then you can give a subtle choice to consumers. Edoardo, thank you very much. I think this has been a wonderful conversation, very insightful for me. I've learned a lot from this. I wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.